Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Now on May 2nd, 2026, at exactly 3 a.m. Eastern Time, an entire era of American aviation basically came to a sudden, screeching halt. Today, we're diving into a full forensic investigation of the massive corporate failure of Spirit Airlines. I mean, you have to wonder, how does a major domestic carrier just cease to exist overnight? Well, as we're going to see, it wasn't just one single fatal blow. It was a perfect storm of compounding crises.
To really wrap our heads around the sheer gravity of this collapse, we have to look at the immediate human impact. At that 3 a.m. shutdown, 17,000 employees woke up to find out their livelihoods were just gone. We're talking pilots, flight attendants, mechanics, ground crews, people who, by the way, had actually just agreed to take pretty significant pay cuts to try and keep the airline afloat. And just like that, they lost their jobs, literally overnight. Thousands of crew members were suddenly stranded in cities far from home.
And the blast radius extended way beyond the tarmac. That sudden shutdown stranded an estimated 1.8 million passengers, instantly wiping nearly 9,000 scheduled flights right off the board for the month of May alone. Imagine you're showing up to the airport for your family vacation, bags packed, and you find the ticket counters completely shuttered and the planes just parked. It was a totally unprecedented disruption.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is that the breadcrumbs for this fatal May morning were already there. Spirit was navigating what restructuring experts actually call a Chapter 22, which basically means it was their second bankruptcy filing in a really short time frame. Look at this terminal freefall from December 2025 to January 2026. We're seeing a 15.55% drop in total operating revenue and a truly staggering 594.5% crash in operating income. They were bleeding cash fast. But, they did have a restructuring plan in place. The problem? That plan heavily relied on a stable world.
So, let's dive into Section 1, the geopolitical fuel shock.
The devastating external blow, the catalyst that basically shattered their fragile finances, hit on February 28, 2026. Geopolitical instability really escalated with a U.S. and Israel offensive in Iran. This instantly disrupted the Strait of Hormuz, which is absolutely crucial because 25% of global jet fuel exports pass through there. Look at this timeline. It's brutal. By March, crude oil jumped 64%. By April, jet fuel spiked to over $4.51 a gallon. For an ultra-low-cost carrier, having your jet fuel costs double practically overnight, it literally torches your entire business model.
Okay, to really understand why this was so lethal, we need to quickly look at operating margin. In the airline industry, profit only exists after you've paid for your variable costs. And the absolute biggest, most volatile variable cost in aviation, that's jet fuel.
Which brings us to the brutal mathematics of marginal insolvency. Analysts ran the numbers, and they calculated that for every single dollar jet fuel prices increased per gallon, Spirit was hit with about $360 million in added annual expenses. Just let that sink in for a second. At the end of 2025, Spirit's entire cash buffer was only $337 million. So this sudden price spike mathematically wiped out their liquidity overnight. They were, quite literally, flying on empty. So looking at the April 2026 spot peak, we saw a massive 90.5% spike compared to what was forecasted before the war. Now, legacy carriers, like your Deltas or Uniteds, they can absorb a hit like this by relying on high-yield premium fares or really robust fuel hedging programs. But Spirit, they relied entirely on a highly price-sensitive, bare fare leisure model. They genuinely couldn't raise ticket prices enough to cover that fuel cost without completely alienating their customer base. Their business model was perfectly tuned for a low-cost energy environment, but it morphed into a fatal structural liability in a wartime economy.
All right, moving on to Section 2, engines and blocked mergers.
Because we can't just blame the price of oil for this. Behind the scenes, Spirit was dealing with some severe pre-existing conditions. They were the largest domestic operator of Airbus planes that used a specific Pratt & Whitney engine, which unfortunately suffered from a massive powder metal manufacturing defect. And this brilliantly illustrates the double penalty Spirit was facing. On one hand, you have capacity contraction. They literally couldn't fly their full schedule because planes were waiting for engine teardowns. On the other hand, you have operating inefficiency. To cover those gaps, they were forced to fly older, gas-guzzling aircraft right smack in the middle of a global fuel crisis.
To grasp the sheer scale of this grounding, Spirit had 39 of their absolute best, most fuel-efficient aircraft sitting completely idle on the tarmac. That is roughly 19% of their entire fleet out of commission. So when that 2026 oil shock hit, Spirit was essentially stepping into the ring to fight with one hand tied securely behind its back.
And we can't talk about this without mentioning the regulatory shadow hanging over the whole situation. Back in 2024, the Department of Justice blocked a $3.8 billion merger between Spirit and JetBlue. The intention there was to protect budget travelers from higher fares. But ironically, blocking that lifeline ended up leaving Spirit as what analysts called a zombie carrier. They were too small to really compete with the big guys, but way too burdened by debt to survive on their own low-cost edge.
Which brings us to the chaos of the final days. Section 3. The Failed Federal Rescue.
In late April 2026, Spirit was completely out of options. That's when an 11th-hour intervention actually hit the table. The Trump administration stepped in, engaging in some pretty intense negotiations to throw the airline a massive federal lifeline. This proposed deal rested on three main pillars. First, a $500 million emergency loan for immediate cash. Second, equity warrants granting the government a 90% ownership stake in the reorganized airline. And third, strict job preservation mandates designed specifically to protect those 17,000 employees.
But the deal totally collapsed. Why? Because the senior bondholders, we're talking major financial players like Citadel and Ares, they flat out refused to support the bailout. Their argument was that the government's loan would dilute their own financial claims. One creditor who was close to the negotiations delivered this absolutely devastating quote. The Trump administration made an extraordinary effort to try and save Spirit, but you can't breathe life into a corpse. The creditors fundamentally believed the business model was broken beyond repair. And with that, Spirit's fate was officially sealed.
So, what happens now? Section 4. Fallout for fares and flyers.
The doors closed at 3 a.m. Let's move to this and see how this builds out in the actual market. At Fort Lauderdale, which was Spirit's dominant hub, their 25.5% market share vanished literally overnight. Competitors swooped in to absorb those empty gates and slots, with JetBlue projected to jump right up to 25.4%. But here's the catch. Without Spirit there to aggressively push prices down, the market reaction is going to be stark. Analysts expect average airfares on those competing routes to instantly jump by about 23%.
And for the 1.8 million displaced flyers, it's an incredibly frustrating situation. Yes, the Department of Transportation mandates refunds, but a bankruptcy liquidation can temporarily freeze a company from actually issuing them. So if you're caught in this, here is the most practical advice. Number 1, file a chargeback with your credit card company right now for non-delivery of services. Number 2, if you have travel insurance, initiate your claims since the liquidation is official. And number 3, whatever you do, avoid the airport. Spirit has shuttered everything. There is literally no one at those counters to help you rebook.
Ultimately, the collapse of Spirit Airlines isn't just a business failure, it's a profound, industry-altering moment. Spirit was the primary disruptor of fare structures in America, an ecosystem that was built all the way back in the 1978 Deregulation Act. With them gone, we're looking down the barrel of a K-shaped aviation market, where the legacy carriers are doing just fine, but the options for the ultra-budget flyer are completely vanishing. It really forces us to ask, is the era of the truly budget-conscious traveler over forever? It's a pretty sobering thought, and it definitely leaves you wondering what the skies are going to look like a decade from now. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer. I really hope this breakdown helped you see the bigger picture. Catch you next time.
An investment in knowledge pays the best interest, so why not invest in this channel? Click like and subscribe for more.